Hello, family of the channel. Before we begin, if this story touches your heart, please leave a like and let me know in the comments which country you're watching from. If you enjoy our content, it's very important that you subscribe to the channel to help us reach more people who need to hear testimonies from those who have faced life's greatest difficulties with Jesus Christ in their hearts. What I'm about to tell you changed my life forever, and I need to share it because I know many of you have gone through something similar. My name is Michael, I'm 45 years old, and until not too long ago, everyone knew me as Father Michael. For 15 years, I served as a priest in the Diocese of St. Jude, a community I loved more than anything. It was my home, my family, and my entire life's purpose, all dedicated to serving God and His people. Today you'll see how I, a priest cast out and publicly shamed, exposed a wolf in shepherd's clothing in front of the very people he was deceiving. You'll witness how a single forgotten recording brought down a corrupt bishop in the middle of his own grand celebration, proving that God's light always finds a way to pierce the darkest corners. Listen to my story to the end and tell me, what would you have done in my place? For most of my life, things were simple. I woke up every morning with a prayer on my lips, grateful for the chance to serve. My parish was in the heart of the city, a place full of struggle but also full of faith. I knew the names of the children, the worries of the parents, and the quiet hopes of the elderly. My life wasn't rich in money, but it was overflowing with purpose. Everything was overseen by Bishop Alistair Croft. He was a man who commanded attention. He was charming, spoke beautifully, and had a knack for making powerful people feel important. But I always sensed something else behind his polished smile. He managed the diocese like a corporation, more concerned with fundraising galas and public image than with the humble work of saving souls. One afternoon he called me to his office. It was an intimidating room, filled with dark wood, expensive paintings, and a desk so large it felt like a barrier. He started by praising my work, especially with our Faith in Action charity fund. This was our lifeline to the community, the money we used to run homeless shelters and soup kitchens. Then, with a calm smile, he laid out his plan. He wanted to divert a large portion of that charity money into what he called a private discretionary fund. He used fancy words like strategic investments and long-term growth, but my heart went cold. I knew exactly what he was saying. He was planning to steal from the poorest and most desperate people in our city. To ensure my cooperation, he offered me a bribe disguised as a promotion. He described a beautiful, wealthy parish in the suburbs, a place with a brand new rectory and influential parishioners. It was an easier life, a more comfortable position. All I had to do was stay silent and let him take money meant for the hungry. I felt a fire in my chest, the kind of righteous anger you read about in the Bible. I looked him straight in the eye and told him no. I called his plan what it was: a theft from God and His most vulnerable children. I told him I would never be a part of it. The friendly mask he wore instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, hard glare I had never seen before. He leaned forward, his voice low and menacing. "In this world, Michael," he said, "loyalty is more valuable than piety. You've chosen the wrong side." It wasn't a loud threat, but it was a clear one. I had challenged a powerful man, and he was going to make me pay for it. I left that office knowing my life was about to change. Just a few days later, at a large diocesan assembly, he made his move. He stood at the podium in front of everyone, my friends, my colleagues, the people I had served for a decade and a half, and announced my immediate suspension. He spoke of credible allegations of financial misconduct and a crisis of faith, painting a picture of a fallen priest. He was framing me for a smaller, more believable version of the exact crime he was committing himself. The room was utterly silent. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on me, filled with shock, confusion, and the beginnings of suspicion. In that single cruel moment, Bishop Croft didn't just take my job, he stole my name, my reputation, and my life's work. I was frozen in place, standing there in front of everyone I knew. The bishop's words, financial misconduct, echoed in the grand hall, each syllable a hammer blow against my life. A deep, chilling silence fell over the room, as hundreds of eyes turned to me. They weren't just looking, they were judging, dissecting 15 years of my service in a single heart-stopping moment. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me, leaving me in a free fall with nothing to grab onto. My shock was so profound, I couldn't even form a word of defense. Listen to this story to the end and tell me, what would you have done in my place? The bishop's accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. In that instant, I was no longer Father Michael, their priest and friend. I was a stranger, a criminal. I saw the confusion on the faces of my parishioners, the people I had baptized, married, and comforted. I saw the quick, knowing glances between the bishop's loyalists, who now looked at me with cold satisfaction. The betrayal was so sudden and absolute that my mind couldn't process it. It was a public execution of my character, and Bishop Croft was the smiling executioner, holding the weapon he had fashioned from lies. 2 diocesan officials, men I had shared meals with, approached me with grim faces. They didn't touch me, but their presence was a wall, guiding me out of the assembly as if I were a contagion. No one spoke a word to me. The walk through that crowd was the longest of my life. Every step was heavy with shame and disbelief. I had walked into that hall as a respected member of the clergy. I was leaving it as a pariah, stripped of my dignity in front of the very community I had poured my soul into for over a decade. Within the hour, I was told to vacate the rectory. The place I called home, where I prayed, studied, and lived, was suddenly no longer mine. Packing my few belongings into boxes felt surreal. Every book, every photograph, was a memory of a life that had just been declared a fraud. The administrative coldness of it all was stunning. There was no investigation, no chance to speak, just a swift, brutal removal. I was being erased, and the institution I had dedicated my life to was handing me the eraser. The isolation was immediate and complete. The friends I thought I had within the clergy suddenly stopped answering my calls. Parishioners who used to greet me with warm smiles now crossed the street to avoid me. The loneliness was a physical weight, a constant pressure on my chest. I felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of a life that was no longer mine. The initial shock began to curdle into a slow-burning anger. This wasn't just an injustice against me. It was an attack on the truth itself, and I knew, deep in my soul, that God would not let it stand. My life before all this was built on simple things. I grew up in a small town where faith wasn't just for Sunday mornings. It was in the way my mother cared for a sick neighbor, and the way my father worked tirelessly without complaint. We didn't have much money, but our home was rich in love and prayer. I learned early on that a person's worth wasn't in what they owned, but in the good they put out into the world. That simple truth became the foundation of everything I believed in. The call to serve God wasn't some dramatic lightning bolt moment. It was a quiet, persistent whisper in my heart that grew louder over the years. It was a deep-seated need to help people, to offer comfort in times of sorrow and share in their moments of joy. Choosing to enter the seminary felt like coming home. It was a path that required sacrifice, but it promised a life of immense purpose, and that was all I ever really wanted for myself. Seminary was tough. The long hours of study, the discipline, the constant self-reflection, it was designed to test you, to separate those who were called from those who were just curious. But I found a brotherhood there, a group of young men who shared my idealism. We all believed we could make a difference, that we could be a light in a world that often felt dark. Those years forged my resolve and deepened my faith in ways I couldn't have imagined. My first assignment after ordination was in a small, quiet parish out in the country. It was there that I truly learned what it meant to be a priest. It wasn't about giving grand sermons. It was about sitting with a grieving widow, helping a farmer mend a fence, and knowing the names of every child in the catechism class. It was humble work, but it was real, and it taught me that ministry is about connection, one person at a time. When I was transferred to the Diocese of St. Jude in the heart of the city, it was a culture shock. The noise, the poverty, the desperation. It was overwhelming at first. But beneath the hardship, I found a community with a spirit that was unbreakable. These were good, hard-working people fighting every day just to get by. I knew immediately that this was where God wanted me to be, among those who needed His presence the most. That's why I started the Faith in Action Fund. It wasn't some grand diocesan initiative. It began with me going door to door, talking to local business owners, and asking for whatever people could spare. I wanted to create something that would have a direct, immediate impact on our community, a fund to keep the lights on for a family facing eviction, or to run the soup kitchen that fed hundreds every day. I'll never forget the first family we helped, a single mother with 3 kids whose husband had left them. She was working 2 jobs but was about to be put out on the street. Using the first donations we ever received, we paid her back rent and helped her find a better-paying job through a parish connection. Seeing the relief and hope in her eyes, that was the moment I knew this was the most important work of my life. This fund was sacred. Over 15 years, I became more than just the priest at St. Jude's. I was a part of the neighborhood's fabric. I coached the youth basketball team, I volunteered at the community garden, and I spent countless hours in hospital waiting rooms, praying with families. My life wasn't lived at an arm's length from a pulpit. It was lived in the trenches, right alongside the people I was called to serve. They were my family. It wasn't always easy. There were days I felt completely overwhelmed, days my own faith was tested by the suffering I witnessed. I had my own moments of doubt and weakness, just like anyone else. I was never a perfect man, and I certainly wasn't a saint. I was just someone trying to follow the path Christ laid out, to love my neighbor and serve the poor. My humanity, my flaws, were part of my ministry. When Bishop Alistair Croft was appointed, I was hopeful. He was charismatic, well-spoken, and seemed to have a vision for the future. He talked about growth and outreach, and at first I was impressed by his ambition. But it didn't take long to see that his vision was more corporate than spiritual. He was more comfortable in boardrooms with wealthy donors than in a homeless shelter. A quiet unease began to settle in my heart whenever I was around him. The diocese began to change under his leadership. The focus shifted from small, community-based ministries to large, flashy fundraising galas. Everything became about image, about attracting powerful people and big money. The humble, grassroots work that I believed in was slowly being pushed to the side in favor of projects that looked good on a brochure. The soul of our mission was being replaced by a balance sheet. I often thought of my parents who had passed away years ago. I remembered the look of pure pride on their faces the day I was ordained. They were simple people who believed in honesty and integrity above all else. The thought of them seeing me now, publicly shamed and cast out under a cloud of lies, was a pain deeper than any other. It felt like I had not only failed myself and my parish, but their memory as well. The friendships I had built with my fellow priests were a source of great strength for me over the years. We supported each other, shared our burdens, and held each other accountable. But after the bishop's announcement, it was like those bonds had evaporated overnight. The silence from men I considered my brothers was one of the most painful parts of the betrayal. I was utterly and completely alone. Before that meeting in the bishop's office, my life was exactly what I had prayed it would be. It wasn't a life of comfort or wealth, but it was rich in purpose and meaning. My small room in the rectory was my sanctuary. My work was my passion, and my community was my world. I had everything that mattered. I had built a life of service, brick by brick, prayer by prayer, for 15 years. And in just a few calculated, cruel minutes, Bishop Croft tore it all down. He didn't just take my job or my home. He took my name, my past, and my future. He tried to poison the love and trust that had been the bedrock of my entire existence. The sheer scale of that loss, the theft of a life's work, lit a fire in me. It was a fire for justice, not for my own sake, but for every person he was deceiving and stealing from. It is very important that you subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video so that YouTube recommends this incredible story to more people. This way, you help us spread the gospel through real stories of testimonies. So please, help us in this noble cause. The doors of the rectory closed behind me with a quiet, final click. That sound was the end of my world. I stood on the sidewalk with 2 cardboard boxes holding the sum of my life, watching the place I called home become just another building on a street I no longer belonged to. The city lights seemed colder, harsher. For the first time in 15 years, I had no key in my pocket, no place to go, and no title to my name. I was just Michael, a man standing on the edge of a life that had been stolen from him. My first few nights were spent in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and sheets that smelled of bleach and despair. I'd lie awake, staring at the water-stained ceiling, replaying the bishop's words over and over. Each time, the betrayal cut deeper. My savings were meager, and I knew they wouldn't last. The diocesan investigation had frozen my modest personal account, leaving me with only the cash I had in my wallet. I was adrift, and the shore was nowhere in sight. The loneliness was a physical presence in that small, damp room. It sat on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The silence was the worst part. My life had been filled with the sounds of community, choir practice, children laughing, the murmur of prayer. Now there was only the hum of the motel's ice machine and the distant wail of sirens. I tried to pray, but the words felt hollow, bouncing off the ceiling and falling back on me like dust. God felt a million miles away. Within a week, the money ran out. I sold my small collection of theological books, the ones that had been my companions through seminary, for a fraction of what they were worth. I even sold the simple gold cross my parents had given me for my ordination. Handing it over to the pawnshop owner felt like a final surrender, a severing of the last tie to the man I used to be. Each item I parted with was another piece of my old life being chipped away, leaving me smaller and more exposed. Finding work was a lesson in humility I never expected to learn. My resume was a single line: priest, Diocese of St. Jude, 15 years. It was a conversation stopper. Some potential employers looked at me with pity, others with suspicion. The news of my misconduct had spread like a virus. I was tainted goods. The doors that had once opened for me with respect were now firmly shut in my face. I was not just unemployed, I was unemployable. Eventually, desperation led me to a janitorial services company. They didn't ask many questions. They just needed a man willing to work the night shift, cleaning office buildings downtown after everyone else had gone home. The uniform was a gray jumpsuit, a world away from the vestments I once wore. My first night, as I pushed a mop across a vast, empty lobby, I caught my reflection in the polished marble floor. I didn't recognize the tired, defeated man looking back at me. The work was hard and mindless, which was a small blessing. It kept my thoughts from spiraling at least for a few hours each night. I became a ghost, moving through silent, empty buildings, cleaning up the remnants of other people's busy lives. I was invisible, and in a way, it was a relief. No one knew who I was. There were no pitying looks, no whispered accusations. There was just the squeak of my cart's wheels and the rhythmic swoosh of the buffer. The social shunning was more painful than the financial hardship. I saw Mrs. Gable, a sweet old woman whose husband I had given last rites to, at the grocery store. Our eyes met for a second. I saw the recognition, then the flicker of confusion, and then she quickly looked away, hurrying down another aisle as if she hadn't seen me at all. That small, simple act of avoidance felt like a physical blow. It was a confirmation that I was now an outcast. My closest friend from the seminary, Father David, stopped returning my calls after the first week. I left him messages pleading for him to just listen, to believe me, but there was only silence. The institution we had both sworn our lives to had drawn a line, and he had chosen to stay on the other side. The brotherhood I had cherished, the bond I thought was unbreakable, had shattered under the weight of the bishop's lie. Bishop Croft, on the other hand, was thriving. I'd see his picture in the newspaper, smiling at some charity event, accepting a plaque from the mayor. He was praised for his strong leadership in a time of difficulty. He used my fabricated scandal to position himself as a reformer, a man cleaning up the diocese. He was building his legacy on the ruins of my life, and the world was applauding him for it. The injustice of it all was a bitter pill I had to swallow every single day. One evening, I saw a young couple I had married just a year prior. They were walking hand in hand, laughing. As they passed me on the street, the husband glanced over. His smile faded instantly, replaced by a look of pure contempt. He pulled his wife closer to him, shielding her as if I were some sort of predator. In his eyes, I was no longer the man who had blessed their union. I was a stain on their happy memory. The nights were the hardest. Alone in my tiny, rented room, the anger and grief would wash over me. I questioned everything: my faith, my calling, my trust in people. How could a man of God, a bishop, be so consumed by greed and cruelty? How could the people I had served, the community I loved, abandon me so completely without even asking for my side of the story? The questions circled in my mind, offering no peace, only more pain. My faith in the church as an institution was completely broken. It was a structure built by men, and I was seeing firsthand how fallible and corrupt those men could be. But my faith in God, though deeply wounded, refused to die. It was a small, flickering ember in the darkness of my despair. I clung to it, praying not for deliverance, but for understanding. I had to believe there was a purpose to this suffering, even if I couldn't see it. The turning point came on a Tuesday night. I was cleaning the executive washrooms in a high-rise bank building. The work was disgusting, but it paid the rent. As I was on my hands and knees scrubbing a floor, the door swung open. A man in a tailored suit walked in, talking loudly on his phone. I recognized him immediately. It was Mr. Harrison, one of the diocese's wealthiest donors, a man who sat on several of the bishop's committees. He didn't notice me at first. He finished his call and walked over to the sink. As he washed his hands, his eyes met mine in the mirror. He paused, a look of confusion on his face. Then, a slow, cruel smirk spread across his lips. He dried his hands, turned to me, and looked down at my gray jumpsuit and the scrub brush in my hand. He let out a small, condescending laugh. "Well, well, Father Michael," he sneered, drawing out my old title like an insult. "I suppose this is more your speed. Cleaning up filth." He looked around the pristine bathroom. "I always knew there was something off about you. Too much time with the poor, not enough respect for your betters." He tossed his paper towel on the floor, deliberately missing the trash can. "Clean that up," he said, and walked out. I stayed there on my knees, frozen. His words echoed in the tiled room, each one a fresh stab to my soul. It wasn't just the insult. It was the satisfaction in his eyes, the sheer pleasure he took in my humiliation. He was a reflection of the bishop's world, a world of power, arrogance, and contempt for the very people Christ called us to serve. The cold tile floor felt like the bottom of the world. For a long moment I felt nothing but a hollow emptiness. The fight had gone out of me. He was right. I was a failure, a disgraced priest, cleaning toilets for a living. The bishop had won. He had taken everything from me and ground me into the dirt, and his powerful friends were there to spit on me for good measure. Despair was a cold, heavy blanket, and I was ready to let it smother me. But then, something shifted. As the echo of his laughter faded, a different feeling began to surface. It wasn't sadness or despair. It was fire. A cold, clear, righteous anger began to burn away the fog of my grief. It was the same fire I felt in the bishop's office, but this time it was different. It wasn't just a flash of indignation. It was a slow-burning furnace being stoked in the deepest part of my soul. I slowly got to my feet, my hands clenched into fists. Mr. Harrison hadn't just insulted me. He had insulted every poor person I had ever served. He had mocked the very core of the gospel. In that moment, I understood that my silence was a form of complicity. By accepting my fate, by disappearing into the shadows, I was letting the darkness win. I was letting Bishop Croft and men like Harrison defile everything that was sacred. The humiliation was no longer a source of shame. It was fuel. I picked up the discarded paper towel and threw it in the trash, but the act felt different. It wasn't an act of a defeated janitor. It was the first small act of a man who was done being a victim. My fall wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a different kind of ministry, one that Bishop Croft would never see coming. That night, my prayers changed. I stopped asking God why this had happened to me. I started asking Him to show me the way forward. I asked for strength, not to endure, but to fight. I asked for wisdom, not to understand my suffering, but to use it. I was a shepherd whose flock had been scattered by a wolf, and I knew with every fiber of my being that it was my sacred duty to expose him. I went back to my small room and sat on the edge of the bed. The city outside was asleep, but I had never felt more awake. The path ahead was dark and uncertain, and I had no resources, no allies, and no power. I was just one man against a powerful, corrupt system, but I had one thing the bishop didn't count on. I had nothing left to lose, and that made me dangerous. The image of Bishop Croft's smug smile at the assembly flashed in my mind, followed by Mr. Harrison's sneer in the bathroom. These men believed they were untouchable, protected by their wealth and their positions. They operated in the shadows, confident that their lives would never be challenged. They had forgotten a simple, profound truth that I had preached for 15 years. I thought of the story of David and Goliath. I had always told the children in my parish that it wasn't about the size of the warrior, but the size of his faith. For the first time, I felt the truth of that story in my own bones. My resolve hardened into something unbreakable. This was no longer about clearing my name. This was about justice. It was about honoring my calling, even without a collar. A plan began to form in the quiet of that lonely room, a plan to let the light shine in the darkness. Back in my room, the anger from that encounter in the bathroom was still burning inside me. It had burned away the despair, leaving a cold, hard resolve in its place. I knew I couldn't let this stand. I started going through the 2 boxes of belongings I had managed to take from the rectory. Most of it was just books and old papers, remnants of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just trying to connect with the man I used to be. Deep at the bottom of a box filled with theological commentaries, my fingers brushed against a small, cold, metallic object. I pulled it out. It was a digital voice recorder, no bigger than my thumb. For a moment, I had completely forgotten about it. It was a relic from a time of growing unease, a precaution I had started taking months before my suspension, a secret I had kept from everyone. I had packed it away in the chaos, and it had slipped my mind entirely. I remembered buying it. Bishop Croft's way of doing business always felt more like a boardroom than a rectory. He spoke in vague terms and made verbal promises that were never put in writing. A small, nagging voice in my head, a whisper I now believe was the Holy Spirit, told me to be careful, so I started carrying the recorder in my jacket pocket for any important meeting, just to have a clear record for my own protection. It was a simple act of caution from a man who was beginning to see the cracks in the facade. My hands were trembling slightly as I found a pair of old headphones and plugged them in. I scrolled through the files. There were only a few recordings, mostly short notes to myself. And then I saw it. A file dated the day of my last meeting with the bishop, the meeting that had destroyed my life. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and pressed play. His voice, smooth and confident, filled my ears, as clear as if he were sitting right there in the room with me. The entire conversation was there, every single word. His praise for my work, the casual way he unveiled his plan to steal from the Faith in Action Fund, his talk of discretionary accounts and strategic investments. It was all there, a perfect, undeniable record of his corruption. He had laid out his entire criminal enterprise to me, never once suspecting that the simple priest sitting across from him was creating a permanent record of his greed. Then came the bribe. I heard my own voice, firm and clear, rejecting his offer of a wealthy parish. I heard myself call his plan a theft from God. And then I heard the shift in his tone. The charm vanished, replaced by the cold, menacing threat. In this world, Michael, loyalty is more valuable than piety. You've chosen the wrong side. Hearing it again sent a chill down my spine, but this time it wasn't a chill of fear. It was the icy thrill of holding the truth in my hand. I listened to the entire recording 3 times. The humiliation I had felt, the shame that had been my constant companion for months, began to dissolve. It was replaced by a profound sense of clarity. This recording wasn't just my defense. It was the sword God had placed in my hand. I was no longer a disgraced janitor. I was the keeper of a truth so powerful it could bring down a prince of the church. The bishop had cast me into the darkness, but he had forgotten that I carried a spark of light with me. In his arrogance, Bishop Croft saw me as a simpleton, a naive, overly pious man who was good with the poor but had no understanding of power or strategy. He thought that by taking my collar and my reputation he had taken everything. He never imagined I could possess the foresight to arm myself, or the strength to fight back. His greatest mistake was underestimating the resolve of a man who had nothing left to lose and a God to serve. He saw a sheep, but he had created a shepherd ready to defend the flock. This was no longer about personal revenge. I looked at the small recorder in my palm and saw it for what it was, an instrument of divine justice. Clearing my name was secondary. My true purpose was to protect the people he was stealing from, to cleanse the house of God that he was defiling with his greed. Vengeance is the Lord's, the Bible says, but sometimes he chooses the most unlikely people to be his vessel. I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since the day I was ordained. My mind started racing, not with anger, but with strategy. I couldn't just release this recording to the press. The bishop's powerful lawyers would dismiss it as a fake, a desperate fabrication from a disgraced priest. They would bury it in legal challenges until it lost all impact. No, the truth had to be revealed in a way that was public, immediate, and undeniable. It had to be delivered on a stage of the bishop's own making, in front of the very people whose approval he craved. My fall had given me an unexpected advantage, invisibility. As Father Michael I was watched and known. As Michael the janitor I was nobody. I could move through the city, through the very buildings the bishop's powerful friends owned, and no one would give me a second glance. My gray jumpsuit was the perfect camouflage. The humiliation he had forced upon me was about to become the key to his downfall. He had made me a ghost, and now I would haunt him. I thought of David facing Goliath. David didn't have armor or a great sword. He had a simple sling and a few smooth stones, tools that the giant would have laughed at. This small recorder was my stone. It was a humble, overlooked thing, but in the right hands, and with God's aim, it could bring down a giant. The fear was gone, replaced by a calm, focused determination that settled deep in my bones. The path forward was clear. Bishop Croft loved the spotlight. He thrived on public adoration and grand ceremonies. His favorite event of the year was the annual Diocesan Charity Gala, a lavish affair where he would stand before the city's elite and celebrate the success of the very fund he was secretly draining. That gala was his stage, his temple of vanity, and it was there that I would deliver my sermon. I began to form a plan, piece by piece. It was audacious, risky, and would require every bit of knowledge I had of the diocese's inner workings. I knew the layouts of the buildings, the procedures for events, and the people who worked behind the scenes. For 15 years, I had been a faithful servant within that system. Now I would use that knowledge to dismantle it from the inside out. I held the recorder, my weapon, and knelt by my bed. My prayer was no longer a plea for help, but a promise of action. Lord, I whispered into the quiet of the room, you have given me the means. Now grant me the strength to see it through. Let your light shine in the darkness, and let the truth set us all free. The game had changed. The hunt had begun. Before I reveal how the vengeance unfolded, it is very important that you subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video so that YouTube recommends this incredible story to more people. This way, you help us spread the gospel through real stories of testimonies. So please, help us in this noble cause. The night of the Diocesan Charity Gala was cold and clear. I stood across the street from the cathedral, not in a suit, but in my familiar gray janitor's jumpsuit, a tool belt at my waist. This uniform, once a symbol of my humiliation, was now my key. I felt a strange calm, the kind that comes when you've given everything over to God's hands. This wasn't about hate. It was a cleansing. I was here to do a different kind of janitorial work, to sweep out the filth that had taken root in the house of the Lord. The plan was set, and every piece depended on me being exactly what the bishop had made me. Invisible. Using a service entrance I knew from years of coordinating parish events, I slipped into the cathedral's labyrinth of back hallways. The sounds of the gala, clinking glasses, polite laughter, and a string quartet were a world away. I made my way to the small audio-visual room that overlooked the main hall, a place no one ever thought to guard. It was just as I remembered. With practiced hands, I patched my small digital recorder into the main soundboard. It was a simple connection, a single cable that would carry the truth from my pocket to every corner of that grand room. My access to the stage had been secured a week earlier. I had sought out Deacon Thomas, a good young man who still saw me as a mentor. I told him a story of wanting to make a public apology, to confess my supposed sins and ask for forgiveness so I could move on with my life. He believed me, and seeing my broken state, he pleaded my case. Bishop Croft, loving the idea of such a public display of his power and my submission, had readily agreed. He thought he was arranging his final victory lap, the ultimate humiliation of his enemy. The moment came. As my name was called, a murmur went through the crowd. I walked from the shadows toward the brightly lit stage, my work boots silent on the marble floor. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, a mixture of pity, curiosity, and contempt. I saw the faces of the city's most powerful people, the very ones whose money the bishop was stealing. And at the head table I saw him. Bishop Alistair Croft was beaming, a benevolent king watching a peasant approach his throne, ready to be amused. I reached the podium and looked out over the sea of faces, finally letting my gaze rest on the bishop. His smile was wide, indulgent. I leaned into the microphone, my heart steady. The Bible teaches us. I began, my voice clear and even, that the truth will set you free. I saw a flicker of confusion in his eyes. I continued, "Tonight, I seek not vengeance, but truth, and I have a confession to make." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air, but it is not my own. Before anyone could react, I pressed the small button in my pocket. The bishop's voice, my secret resource, erupted from the speakers, amplified and crystal clear. "In this world, Michael, loyalty is more valuable than piety." The hall fell into a stunned silence. His entire scheme, his talk of discretionary funds, the bribe, the threat, it all poured into the room, undeniable and raw. On the large screens behind me, a simple audio waveform pulsed with every damning word. I watched the bishop's face, saw the color drain away, his confident smile twisting into a mask of pure, abject horror. The recording ended, and the silence that followed was heavier than any sound. It was the silence of a legacy being shattered, of a powerful man being utterly and completely exposed. The flashes of cameras from the press table were like lightning strikes, capturing his ruin for the world to see. As two burly security guards started toward the stage, I leaned into the microphone one last time. My voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of justice. "As God is my witness, Bishop," I said softly, "I forgive you." Then I turned and walked off the stage, leaving the chaos behind me. If you made it to the end of the video, comment with the phrase, "Jesus is good," and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue receiving more stories like this one.